The stagecoach tilted dangerously to one side as it careened around the mountain pass, and Beatrice Dawson gripped the worn leather seat with both hands, her knuckles white beneath dust-caked gloves. She had been traveling for 3 weeks straight, running from a past that seemed determined to catch up with her. And now the driver was shouting something she could not quite make out over the thunder of hooves and creaking wood. The other passengers, a portly merchant and an older woman clutching a Bible, looked equally terrified as the coach lurched again, this time hitting something that sent everyone flying from their seats. Beatrice hit the roof of the coach hard, her bonnet falling loose, and when she crashed back down, pain shot through her shoulder. The merchant was yelling now, his voice high and panicked, and through the window she could see trees rushing past far too quickly. Then everything stopped with a violence that stole the breath from her lungs. The coach had crashed into something solid, a boulder perhaps, and the whole conveyance tipped sideways before settling at an angle that made it impossible to stay upright. She crawled toward the door, her carpetbag forgotten in the chaos, and pushed it open with strength she did not know she possessed. The cool Colorado air hit her face as she tumbled out onto rocky ground, scraping her palms. Behind her, the merchant was helping the older woman down, both of them shaken but apparently unharmed. The driver, however, was slumped over in his seat, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead, and the horses were gone, their traces broken, leaving them stranded on this lonely mountain road. "Is he alive?" the older woman asked, her voice trembling. Beatrice climbed up to check, pressing her fingers against the driver's neck until she felt a pulse. "Yes, but he needs a doctor. Where are we?" "Somewhere between Montrose and Gunnison, Colorado, if my memory serves," the merchant said, mopping his face with a handkerchief. "We were supposed to reach Gunnison by nightfall, but that seems unlikely now." Nightfall was perhaps 2 hours away, Beatrice judged by the position of the sun sinking behind the peaks. They were in the middle of nowhere, with an injured man and no way to continue their journey. She looked around, searching for any sign of civilization, and saw only pine trees and rock formations stretching in every direction. The road itself was little more than a rutted track carved into the mountainside. "We should try to make him comfortable," she said, because someone needed to take charge and the other two seemed frozen with shock. "Then one of us will have to walk for help." "Walk?" The merchant's eyes bulged. "In these mountains? It will be dark soon, and there are bears, mountain lions, all manner of dangerous creatures." "Then what do you suggest?" Beatrice asked, trying to keep the edge from her voice. She was tired, so tired of running, of being afraid, of having no one to depend on but herself. But she pushed those thoughts away because this man needed help, and she was not the kind of person who could sit idle when someone was suffering. They managed to get the driver down from his perch and laid him out on a blanket the older woman produced from her bag. He was breathing steadily, which Beatrice took as a good sign, though the wound on his head looked nasty. She tore a strip from her petticoat, dampened it with water from a canteen, and cleaned the blood away as best she could. The other two watched her work with expressions of mingled relief and concern. "I will go for help," she announced when she had done all she could. "You two stay here with him, keep him warm and watch for any changes." "You cannot go alone," the older woman protested. "A young lady, all by herself in the wilderness." "I do not see that we have much choice," Beatrice replied, standing and brushing dirt from her skirts. "I am 22 years old and quite capable of walking. If I follow the road, surely I will reach somewhere eventually." The merchant looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him otherwise. He simply nodded and wished her Godspeed, and Beatrice set off down the mountain road with nothing but the clothes on her back and a determination born of desperation. She had survived worse than a walk through the mountains. She had survived her father's death, her mother's abandonment, and the man who had tried to force her into marriage back in Kansas. A few miles on foot would not break her. The sun sank lower as she walked, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she were not so anxious. Her boots, designed more for stepping in and out of coaches than hiking, began to pinch after the first mile. Her shoulder, injured in the crash, throbbed with each step. But she kept moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering all the reasons she had fled Kansas in the first place. She had been walking for perhaps an hour when she heard the sound of hooves behind her. Beatrice spun around, heart leaping into her throat, half expecting to see the man who had been chasing her, the one who claimed she had made promises she never intended to keep. But instead, she saw a lone rider on a paint horse, moving at an easy pace that suggested he was in no particular hurry. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. A tall man in his mid-20s with a worn hat pulled low over his eyes, a dark coat despite the mild evening, and a rifle resting across his saddle. He reined in when he reached her, the horse snorting and tossing its head. Up close, she could see his face was weathered by sun and wind, his jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and his eyes were a startling shade of green that seemed to take in everything about her in a single glance. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and rough like gravel underfoot. "You are a long way from anywhere to be walking alone." "Our stagecoach crashed," Beatrice explained quickly, gesturing back up the road. "The driver is injured and we need help. Is there a town nearby?" The man's expression shifted to one of concern. "How bad is he hurt?" "A head wound. He is unconscious but breathing." Without another word, the man dismounted, moving with the kind of easy grace that spoke of years spent on horseback. He was taller than she had realized, a good 6 feet at least, and built solid in the way of men who worked hard for their living. "Name is Ethan Rowley," he said, extending a hand. "I've got a ranch about 3 miles south of here. We can take your driver there, get him patched up." Beatrice shook his hand, feeling calluses rough against her palm. "Beatrice Dawson." "Thank you, Mr. Rowley. I was not sure what we were going to do." "Call me Ethan," he said, already swinging back into the saddle. "Climb up behind me, Miss Dawson. We will ride back to your coach and see what can be done." She hesitated for only a moment before accepting his outstretched hand and letting him pull her up behind him. It had been years since she had ridden double like this, not since she was a child and her father was still alive. She wrapped her arms around Ethan's waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his coat, and tried not to think about how intimate this was, how close they were to being strangers. The horse set off at a brisk trot, eating up the distance she had walked in half the time. Ethan did not speak, but she was grateful for that. She was too busy trying to keep her seat and ignore the way her heart was racing, though whether from the ride or the proximity to this stranger, she could not say. When they reached the crashed coach, the merchant and the older woman looked enormously relieved to see them. Ethan dismounted and went immediately to check on the driver, his movements efficient and sure. He examined the head wound, felt for the pulse, and then straightened with a slight frown. "He needs proper doctoring," Ethan said, "but I think he will make it if we get him somewhere warm and keep an eye on him. My ranch is not far. We can load him onto my horse and walk alongside." Between the four of them, they managed to get the driver onto the paint horse, propped up and held steady by the merchant who climbed up behind him. Ethan led the horse by the reins, setting a steady pace, while Beatrice and the older woman followed on foot. The sun had fully set now, and stars were beginning to appear overhead, bright and cold in the mountain sky. "What were you running from?" Ethan asked quietly, falling back to walk beside Beatrice. She started, nearly stumbling over a rock. "What makes you think I was running from anything?" A woman traveling alone with hardly any luggage, looking over her shoulder like she expects someone to jump out at her. "I have seen enough people running to recognize the signs." Beatrice bit her lip, debating how much to tell this stranger. But there was something about him, a steadiness that made her want to trust him despite her better judgment. "There was a man back in Kansas," she said finally, keeping her voice low so the others would not hear. "He decided we were engaged even though I never agreed to it. When I refused to marry him, he became angry, possessive. He said I had led him on, that I owed him, so I left." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable in the growing darkness. "He follow you?" "I do not know," Beatrice admitted. "I have been careful, but I cannot shake the feeling that he might. He is the kind of man who does not like to lose. If he shows up around here, he will have me to deal with," Ethan said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to offer protection to a woman he had just met. Something warm unfurled in Beatrice's chest, a feeling she could not quite name. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." He glanced at her, those green eyes catching the starlight. "Because it is the right thing to do. And because no one should have to run from someone who will not take no for an answer." They walked in silence after that, but it was a companionable silence, easier than Beatrice had felt with anyone in a long time. The older woman behind them was murmuring prayers, her voice a soft counterpoint to the sound of their footsteps on the rocky road. After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, lights appeared in the distance, warm and welcoming against the dark mountainside. "That is my place," Ethan said, a note of something like pride in his voice. "Not much, but it is home." As they drew closer, Beatrice could make out a low ranch house built of logs with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows. It looked like the kind of place where a person could feel safe, could finally stop running and just breathe. A dog barked as they approached, and a moment later a younger man emerged from the house, carrying a lantern. "Ethan, that you?" "Yeah, Marcus," Ethan called back. "Got some folks here who need help. Their stage crashed up on the mountain road." Marcus came closer, holding the lantern high, and Beatrice saw he was perhaps 18 or 19, with the same green eyes as Ethan but a rounder, less weathered face. "Lord above, bring them inside. I will fetch some blankets." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. They got the driver settled in a spare bedroom, and Ethan cleaned and bandaged the head wound with a competence that surprised Beatrice. The merchant and the older woman were given the sitting room to rest in, and Marcus produced a meal of stew and fresh bread that tasted better than anything Beatrice had eaten in weeks. She found herself in the kitchen helping to wash dishes afterward, working alongside Ethan in the lamplight while Marcus sat with their guests. It felt strangely domestic, peaceful in a way her life had not been for months. "You are good at this," she said, watching him set clean plates on a shelf. "Doctoring, I mean. Had to learn," Ethan replied. "Out here, you cannot always get to a real doctor in time. My mother taught me the basics before she passed, said it was important for a man to know how to care for people, not just cattle." She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. He turned to look at her, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. "What are your plans now, Miss Dawson? Assuming the driver recovers, will you continue on to wherever you were headed?" Beatrice realized with a start that she had not thought that far ahead. She had bought a ticket to Gunnison simply because it was far from Kansas, but she had no connections there, no plans for what came next. "I suppose I will find work in town," she said slowly. "Maybe as a seamstress or a cook. I can do both reasonably well. Or you could stay here, Ethan said, and the words hung in the air between them like a held breath. She stared at him. Stay here. Why would you offer that? He shrugged, but there was something intense in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. I could use the help, truth be told. Marcus does his best, but we are running this ranch with just the two of us, and there is more work than we can handle. Cooking, cleaning, mending, all the things that pile up when you do not have time to deal with them. I could pay you a fair wage, give you room and board. You want to hire me, Beatrice said, trying to understand. A woman you just met on the road. I want to help you, Ethan corrected gently. You said you had no one that you were running. Well, if you want, you have got us now. Me and Marcus, this place. A roof over your head and honest work. No strings attached, no expectations beyond a day's work for a day's pay. Beatrice felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had been alone for so long, ever since her father died and her mother remarried and made it clear there was no place for Beatrice in her new life. She had learned to be self-sufficient, to ask for nothing and expect less, and here was this stranger offering her exactly what she needed most: safety, stability, and something that almost felt like belonging. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this for me? Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the way his expression softened when he looked at her. Because I know what it is like to feel alone in the world, he said quietly. When my parents died, it was just me and Marcus, and we had to figure everything out on our own. If someone had offered us help back then, we would have taken it in a heartbeat. So now I am offering the same to you. Not because I expect anything in return, but because it is the right thing to do. She searched his face for any sign of ulterior motives, but all she saw was sincerity. This man, this cowboy who had found her walking alone on a mountain road, was offering her a lifeline without asking for anything except honest work. It seemed too good to be true, and yet something in her heart said she could trust him. All right, Beatrice said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I will stay, at least for a while, until I figure out what comes next. The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm and genuine and utterly transforming. Good, he said simply. That is real good, Miss Dawson. Beatrice, she corrected, returning his smile. If I am going to be working here, you should call me Beatrice. Beatrice, he repeated, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. Welcome home. The word home echoed in her mind long after she had been shown to a small but comfortable bedroom on the second floor, long after she had changed into a borrowed nightgown and crawled beneath clean quilts. Home. She had not had a real home in years, just a series of temporary lodgings and uncomfortable situations. Could this place really become that? Could she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found somewhere she belonged? She fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and the distant lowing of cattle, and for the first time in months, she did not dream of being chased. Morning came with golden light streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. Beatrice dressed quickly in one of the two dresses she owned, a simple blue calico that had seen better days, and made her way down to the kitchen. She found Marcus there, attempting to fry eggs and bacon with limited success. The eggs were already starting to burn, and he looked relieved when he saw her. Thank goodness, he said, stepping back from the stove. I am terrible at this. Ethan usually does the cooking, but he is out checking on the cattle already. Beatrice took over without a word, scraping the burnt eggs into a bucket for the chickens and starting fresh. How long has it been just you and your brother? She asked as she worked. 3 years, Marcus replied, pouring 2 cups of coffee. Our folks died in a winter fever. Took them both within a week of each other. Ethan was 23, I was 16. We have been holding this place together ever since. That must have been hard. It was. Still is sometimes, but Ethan, he is the best man I know. He could have sold this place and moved to a city, made an easier life for himself. But he stayed because this was what our parents built, and he wanted to honor that. Beatrice plated the eggs and bacon, adding biscuits that Marcus had apparently managed to make without burning. "He seems like a good man," she said carefully. "He is," Marcus agreed. "And he has been lonely, though he would never admit it. Not that he does not have me, but it is not the same as having someone, you know. He works from sunup to sundown, never complains, never takes a break. Maybe having you here will be good for him." Before Beatrice could respond to that loaded statement, the door opened and Ethan himself walked in, bringing with him the smell of horses and leather. He pulled off his hat, hung it on a peg, and smiled when he saw the breakfast spread on the table. "Looks like I got back just in time," he said. "That smells a lot better than what Marcus usually makes, no offense, little brother." "None taken," Marcus said cheerfully. "I know my limitations." They sat down to eat together, and Beatrice found herself relaxing into the easy rhythm of their banter. Marcus teased Ethan about getting up too early. Ethan countered by pointing out that someone had to make sure the ranch did not fall apart, and through it all, both brothers made a point of including Beatrice in the conversation. They asked about her journey, about what Kansas was like, about anything except the circumstances that had brought her here. It felt, she thought, like family. After breakfast, Ethan showed her around the property. The ranch was bigger than she had realized, with 100 head of cattle spread across several pastures, a dozen horses, chickens, pigs, and even a milk cow. There was a vegetable garden that had been sadly neglected, a root cellar that needed organizing, and a house that bore all the signs of being inhabited by two men with no time for housekeeping. "I know it is a lot," Ethan admitted as they stood on the porch looking out at the mountains. "But you do not have to do everything at once, just whatever you are comfortable with." "I like to stay busy," Beatrice assured him. "It keeps my mind from wandering to places it should not go." He looked at her with understanding in his eyes. "I know that feeling well." That first week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Beatrice threw herself into work with a determination that impressed both brothers. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows and beating dust from curtains that had not been touched in years. She organized the root cellar, mended clothes, and cooked meals that made Marcus declare he had died and gone to heaven. She weeded the garden and planted late-season vegetables, fed the chickens and collected eggs, and generally made herself indispensable. The stagecoach driver, whose name turned out to be Harold, recovered slowly but surely under Ethan's care. The merchant and the older woman, whose names were Thomas and Martha, left after 3 days with profuse thanks and promises to send payment for the hospitality once they reached Gunnison. Harold remained another week before declaring himself well enough to travel, and Ethan arranged for him to be taken back to Montrose where the stage line had its headquarters. Through it all, Beatrice found herself watching Ethan when she thought he was not looking. The way he moved with such confidence and purpose, the gentleness he showed toward the animals, the patience he displayed with Marcus even when his younger brother made mistakes. She saw how hard he worked, often coming in after dark with exhaustion written in every line of his body, but always with a smile for her when he found dinner waiting. And she saw, too, the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. Not with the possessive, demanding gaze of the man she had fled from in Kansas, but with something softer, something that made her feel warm and cherished rather than trapped. It was dangerous, she told herself, to let her thoughts drift in that direction. She was an employee here, nothing more. Ethan had offered her work out of kindness, not because he wanted anything else from her. Getting attached would only lead to heartbreak when she inevitably had to move on, but her heart, it seemed, had other ideas. One evening about 2 weeks after her arrival, Beatrice was sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Ethan came to join her. He had cleaned up after the day's work, his hair still damp from washing, and he carried 2 glasses of the lemonade she had made that afternoon. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, and she shook her head, accepting the glass he offered. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. The air was cool but not cold, perfect for early September in the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound was answered by another from the opposite direction. "I wanted to thank you," Ethan said eventually, "for everything you have done around here. The place has not looked this good since my mother was alive." "You are paying me," Beatrice pointed out. "You do not need to thank me for doing my job." "It is more than that, though, is it not?" He turned to face her, his expression serious. "You have brought life back to this place. Marcus is happier than I have seen him in years. And well, I find myself looking forward to coming in at the end of the day, knowing you will be here." Beatrice's heart hammered against her ribs. "Ethan, I do not think—" "I am not asking for anything," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know that you are appreciated. That you belong here, if you want to stay. Not just as an employee, but as part of this family we are building." She looked at him, at this good, kind man who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, and felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. "I want to stay," she admitted, "but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of getting comfortable. Of letting myself believe this is real. Every time I've tried to build something, it has been taken away. My father died. My mother chose her new husband over me. And then there was James, the man in Kansas, who seemed so charming at first but turned out to be controlling and cruel. I do not trust my own judgment anymore." Ethan reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and solid. "I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen again," he said quietly. "Life does not work that way. But I can promise that as long as you are here, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. You are not alone anymore, Beatrice. You have got me and Marcus. You have got this place. And if you want, you have got more than that." She looked down at their joined hands, her smaller one cradled in his larger, calloused palm. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I saw you walking down that road," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am saying that you make me want things I thought I had given up on. A partner, a companion, someone to build a life with. I am saying that I am falling for you, Beatrice Dawson, and I wanted you to know it even if you do not feel the same way." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes. "I am scared," she whispered. "So am I," Ethan admitted. "Scared of messing this up, of saying the wrong thing, of moving too fast or too slow. But I would rather be scared and honest than safe and alone." She looked up at him, at this cowboy who had ridden into her life at exactly the moment she needed him most, and made a decision. "I feel it too," she said softly. "This pull between us. I have been trying to ignore it, trying to convince myself it is just gratitude or relief at finding safety. But it is more than that, is it not?" "Yes," Ethan said simply. "It is so much more." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but as Beatrice leaned into it, it deepened into something that spoke of promises and possibilities and hope for the future. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he murmured. "Not as an employee, but as mine. Let me court you properly the way you deserve. Let me show you that not all men are like the one who hurt you." "I want to," Beatrice said, her hands coming up to cup his face. "I want to so much it terrifies me." "Then be terrified with me," Ethan replied, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "We will figure it out together." Over the next months, as autumn gave way to winter, Ethan proved as good as his word. He courted Beatrice with a patience and sweetness that slowly but surely healed the wounds James had left on her heart. He brought her wildflowers from the high meadows, taught her to ride horseback properly, and sat with her on the porch every evening talking about everything and nothing. He never pushed, never demanded, always made it clear that she was in control of how their relationship progressed. Marcus, for his part, could not have been more delighted. He took to calling Beatrice his sister before Ethan had even formally proposed, and appointed himself chaperone for their outings with an enthusiasm that was both endearing and occasionally exasperating. The first snow came in early November, transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland. Beatrice stood at the kitchen window watching fat flakes drift down from a gray sky and felt a contentment she had never known before. She was warm, safe, and for the first time in her life, truly loved. "Beautiful, is it not?" Ethan said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "It is," she agreed, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I never thought I could be this happy." "Get used to it," he murmured against her hair, "because I plan on making you happy for the rest of our lives." She turned in his arms to look up at him. "Is that a proposal, Ethan Rowley?" "Not yet," he said with a smile. "When I propose, you will know it, but it is a promise. I love you, Beatrice. I think I have loved you since I saw you walking down that mountain road, dusty and determined and absolutely beautiful." "I love you too," she whispered, and the words felt like freedom. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and she lost herself in the taste and feel of him. They had kissed many times over the past months, but each time felt like the first, exciting and new and filled with wonder. When they finally broke apart, both were flushed and breathing hard. "Soon," Ethan promised. "I will ask you properly soon. I just want everything to be perfect." Christmas came, and with it, a storm that buried the ranch under 3 feet of snow. They were snowed in for a week, the 3 of them and their animals, and Beatrice discovered that being trapped in close quarters with the Rowley brothers was far from unpleasant. They played cards in the evening, read aloud from the few books they owned, and made music with a fiddle that had belonged to Ethan's father. It was cozy and domestic, and everything Beatrice had dreamed of when she imagined what a real family felt like. On Christmas Eve, after Marcus had gone to bed, Ethan led Beatrice out to the barn. It was cold but clear, stars brilliant overhead and their breath fogged in the frigid air. Inside the barn, it was warmer, the heat from the animals making it almost comfortable. "I wanted to do this where it all started," Ethan said, taking both her hands in his. "In a barn with the animals, simple and honest." Beatrice's heart began to race. "Ethan." "Hush, let me say this before I lose my nerve." He smiled, but she could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "Beatrice Dawson, you came into my life like a miracle. I had resigned myself to being alone, to working this ranch until I was too old to saddle a horse, and then you walked into my world and changed everything. You are strong and kind and beautiful, and you make me want to be a better man. I know we have not known each other long, but I know my heart, and my heart says you are the one I have been waiting for all my life. So I am asking, right here in this barn with God and the horses as my witness, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, the other half of my soul?" Tears streamed down Beatrice's face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. He set her down carefully and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a single small diamond. "It was my mother's," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. "My father gave it to her when they got engaged. She would have wanted you to have it." Beatrice looked down at the ring, at this symbol of a love that had lasted until death and beyond, and felt the weight of the honor Ethan was bestowing on her. "I will treasure it," she promised, "and I will treasure you." They married in February on a bright, cold day that made the snow sparkle like diamonds. The ceremony was held in the small church in Gunnison, with Marcus as best man and Martha, the older woman from the stagecoach who had become a friend through correspondence, standing up for Beatrice. Half the town turned out to celebrate, it seemed, and Beatrice was overwhelmed by the warmth of their welcome into the community. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with such tenderness that more than one person in the congregation wiped away tears. And when they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Beatrice felt like she was walking into her future at last. The wedding celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing at the town hall. Beatrice danced with Ethan, with Marcus, with various townspeople who wanted to welcome the new Mrs. Rowley. She laughed more than she had in years, felt lighter than she could ever remember feeling. As the party began to wind down, Ethan pulled her aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Rowley." The title sent a thrill through her. "More than ready, Mr. Rowley." They rode back to the ranch through moonlit snow, wrapped in blankets with Marcus driving the sleigh. He dropped them at the house, then discreetly took himself off to the barn, claiming he wanted to check on a mare that was due to foal soon. Ethan and Beatrice stood on the porch for a moment, looking up at the stars. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked softly. "Deliriously," Beatrice replied. "I never knew I could feel like this." He scooped her up in his arms, making her squeal with laughter. "Then let me make you even happier." He carried her over the threshold, into their home, into their life together. And later, as they lay tangled in each other's arms in the big bed they would share from now on, Beatrice thought about how far she had come. From running and afraid to loved and cherished. From alone to belonging to someone who belonged to her right back. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you more," Ethan replied, pulling her closer. "And I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving it." Spring came eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and turning the mountains green. Beatrice threw herself into life as a ranch wife with the same determination she had shown as an employee. She learned to help with the cattle during calving season, to ride fence lines checking for breaks, to rope and brand alongside the men Ethan hired for the spring roundup. She tended her garden until it overflowed with vegetables, kept the house spotless, and still found time to visit with the friends she was making in town. She also discovered that being married to Ethan Rowley was even better than courting him had been. He was passionate and tender, strong but gentle, always putting her needs before his own. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's thoughts and movements with the ease of partners who were meant to be together. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they explored the depths of their love with an intensity that left them both breathless. In May, Beatrice realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then sat Ethan down one evening after dinner with her heart in her throat. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hands in hers. He looked concerned immediately. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" "No, not ill. The opposite, really." She smiled, unable to contain her joy. "Ethan, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression blank with shock. Then understanding dawned, and his face transformed with such pure happiness that Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby. Oh, Beatrice, you have made me the happiest man alive." "You are not worried?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. "It will change everything." "For the better," he said firmly. "A child, our child, that is a gift, the best gift you could ever give me besides yourself." Marcus was equally thrilled when they told him, immediately declaring himself the best uncle any baby had ever had. He took to treating Beatrice like she was made of glass, jumping to help her with any task he deemed too strenuous, until she had to laugh and tell him she was pregnant, not dying. The pregnancy progressed well, despite some morning sickness early on that left Beatrice exhausted and irritable. Ethan was endlessly patient, holding her hair when she was sick, bringing her dry crackers and ginger tea, doing whatever he could to ease her discomfort. As her belly grew, he took over more of the heavy work around the house, insisting she rest even though she felt perfectly capable of continuing as before. In the long summer evenings, they would sit on the porch together, and Ethan would talk to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the mountains and how loved they already were. Beatrice would run her fingers through his hair and feel such overwhelming love for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. One night in late July, as they lay in bed with Ethan's hand splayed across her swollen belly, she felt the baby kick. Ethan's eyes went wide with wonder. "Did you feel that?" she asked, laughing at his expression. "That was the baby." He moved his hand, and the baby kicked again, as if responding to its father's touch. "Oh my Lord, that is our child. That is our actual child in there. Did you doubt it?" Beatrice teased. "No, but feeling it makes it so real." He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her belly. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I cannot wait to meet you." The baby kicked again, and they both laughed, giddy with anticipation and joy. That night, Beatrice dreamed of a little boy with Ethan's green eyes, and when she told her husband about it over breakfast, he grinned and said he had dreamed the exact same thing. August turned into September, and Beatrice grew large and uncomfortable. The heat was oppressive, even in the mountains, and she spent most of her time trying to stay cool and off her swollen feet. Ethan was endlessly attentive, fanning her when she was too hot, fetching water whenever she was thirsty, rubbing her aching back until she fell asleep against him. "You do not have to do all this," she murmured one evening as he massaged her feet. "I want to," he replied simply. "You are carrying our child, going through all this discomfort to bring our baby into the world. The least I can do is make you as comfortable as possible." "You are a good man, Ethan Rowley. Only because you make me want to be." The baby came in late September, 3 days of labor that left Beatrice exhausted but exhilarated. The midwife from town stayed with her through it all, and Ethan refused to leave her side despite the midwife's assertions that childbirth was no place for a man. He held Beatrice's hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, and encouraged her through every contraction until finally, with a last tremendous push, their son entered the world. The baby's first cry was the most beautiful sound Beatrice had ever heard. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Beatrice's arms, and she looked down at this tiny, perfect person they had created with hearts so full she thought it might burst. "He is beautiful," Ethan said, his voice breaking as he traced a finger down their son's impossibly soft cheek. "You are beautiful. Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you for this gift." They named him Samuel Ethan Rowley after Ethan's father, and from the moment he drew breath, he became the center of their world. Marcus doted on his nephew with shameless devotion, and Ethan proved to be as natural a father as he was a husband and rancher. He would walk the floor with Samuel when he was fussy, change his nappies without complaint, and spend hours just watching him sleep with an expression of such wonder that it made Beatrice fall in love with him all over again. Those first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Beatrice was up at all hours nursing Samuel, stumbling through her days in a haze of sleeplessness and baby-induced joy. Ethan took over as much of the housework as he could while still running the ranch, and Marcus pitched in without being asked, cooking meals and doing laundry and generally making himself indispensable. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, Beatrice felt like she had found her rhythm. She could nurse the baby, cook dinner, and help with ranch tasks all in the same day without collapsing from exhaustion. Samuel was a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and watching him grow and change was the greatest joy of her life besides the man she shared it with. One evening in early spring, after Samuel had been put to bed, Beatrice found Ethan standing at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the mountains bathed in twilight. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, coming to stand beside him. He wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now compared to a year and a half ago. Back then, I thought I knew what I wanted, to run this ranch, to honor my parents' memory, to take care of Marcus, and those things are still important. But now I have so much more. I have you and Samuel and a family of my own. I have purpose and joy and love, so much love it sometimes overwhelms me." Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was thinking something similar. I came here running from my past, terrified and alone with no idea what the future held. And then you found me on that road and everything changed. You gave me a home when I had none, love when I had given up on it, and a family I never dared dream of. You saved me, Ethan." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was going through the motions of living before you came. Now I am actually alive." They stood like that for a long while, watching the stars come out one by one, and Beatrice thought about the long, winding road that had led her here. All the pain and loss and fear had been worth it to find this moment, this man, this life. She would not change a single thing if it meant not ending up exactly where she was. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch almost before he could walk properly. When he was 3, his sister arrived, a tiny, fierce girl they named a linger after Ethan's mother. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas, who was quieter than his siblings but just as beloved. The ranch prospered under Ethan's management, expanding slowly but steadily until they were one of the largest cattle operations in the area. Marcus eventually met and married a sweet schoolteacher from Gunnison named Catherine, and they built a house on the far end of the property, close enough to help with the ranch but far enough for privacy. The two families grew up intertwined, children running back and forth between houses, Sunday dinners shared around a large table full of laughter and love. Through it all, Beatrice and Ethan's love only deepened. They had their disagreements, as any couple does, but they always worked through them with honesty and respect. They learned each other's moods and habits, the silent language of long married couples who could communicate with a glance. And even after years together, they still made time for romance, for stolen kisses in the barn and long talks on the porch after the children were asleep. One evening, many years after that first meeting on a mountain road, Beatrice and Ethan sat on that same porch watching the sunset. Their children were grown now, Samuel running the ranch alongside his father, Elena married to a rancher from the next valley over, and Thomas off studying law in Denver. Marcus and Catherine's children played nearby, filling the evening with their shouts and laughter. "You ever regret it?" Beatrice asked, taking Ethan's hand. "Taking in that desperate woman you found on the road all those years ago." Ethan turned to look at her, his green eyes still as bright and sharp as they had been in his 20s, though his hair was now more silver than brown. "Regret you? That would be like regretting my own heartbeat. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Rowley. You and our children and this life we have built together. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the sleepless nights when the babies were small," she teased. "Even those," he confirmed. "Especially those because they gave me Samuel and Elena and Thomas. Every moment with you has been a gift, even the hard ones." Beatrice squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses that came from decades of ranch work. "I love you, Ethan. I have loved you from the moment you offered to help a stranger with no reason to trust anyone. You showed me what real love looks like, patient and kind and steadfast. You proved that not all men are selfish or cruel, that some are good all the way through." "I love you too," he replied, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her knuckles. "My Beatrice, my heart, my home. You walked into my life when I least expected it and changed everything for the better. You made me believe in love again, in family, in the possibility of happiness. And every day since has been better than the one before because I got to spend it with you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The children's laughter echoed across the valley, cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere a bird sang its evening song. It was an ordinary moment in an ordinary evening, but to Beatrice, it was everything. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark days in Kansas, when she thought she would never be free. This was the family she had yearned for when she whispered to that cowboy on a mountain road that she had no one. And he had given her this, all of this, by simply replying that she had him now if she wanted him. She had wanted him then, and she wanted him still, and she would want him for all the days she had left on this earth. "Tell me the story again," Samuel's oldest son called out, running up onto the porch with the boundless energy of a 7-year-old. "About how Grandma and Grandpa met." Beatrice looked at Ethan, and he looked back at her, both of them smiling with the shared memory of that day so long ago. "Well," Ethan began, pulling his grandson onto his lap, "it was a day much like this one, clear and beautiful in the mountains. And your grandmother was walking down a road all by herself, brave as anything, looking for help for some folks whose stagecoach had crashed. And you found her," the boy said, having heard this story dozens of times but never tiring of it. "I did," Ethan agreed. "I found her and she found me, and we found each other really. And that was the beginning of the greatest adventure of my life." "Tell him about the proposal in the barn," Beatrice added, settling back in her chair. "That is my favorite part." So Ethan told the story, embellishing some parts and downplaying others, making their grandson laugh with his dramatic reenactments. And Beatrice listened, as she always did, marveling at how a chance encounter on a lonely road had led to this moment, this life, this love that had lasted decades and showed no signs of fading. The sun set completely, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Someone lit lamps in the house, golden light spilling onto the porch. Catherine called that dinner was ready, and the children thundered inside with the adults following at a more sedate pace. The long table was set with mismatched plates and bowls, evidence of many years of family meals, and everyone found their place with the easy familiarity of ritual. As they joined hands to say grace, Beatrice looked around at the faces gathered there. Her children and grandchildren, Marcus and his family, all of them healthy and happy and together. This was her legacy, she thought, not the ranch or the cattle or the land, but this family built on a foundation of love and trust and mutual respect. This was what she and Ethan had created together, and it would outlast them both, continuing down through generations yet unborn. "Thank you, Lord, for this food and for the hands that prepared it," Ethan prayed. "Thank you for family and health and love. Thank you for bringing us together and keeping us strong. May we never take these blessings for granted. Amen." "Amen," echoed around the table, and then the room erupted into the cheerful chaos of a family meal. Food was passed, stories were told, children were reminded to use their manners, and laughter punctuated every conversation. Beatrice served and ate and talked, but part of her mind was elsewhere, thinking about the journey that had led her here. She had been so broken when Ethan found her, so convinced that she was fundamentally unlovable, that any man who showed interest in her would eventually reveal himself to be cruel or controlling. James had done that to her, had taken her natural wariness and turned it into full-blown terror of intimacy and commitment. But Ethan had been patient, had proved through action rather than words that he was different, that his love came without conditions or demands. He had courted her slowly, never pushing, always giving her space to come to terms with her feelings at her own pace. He had proposed in a barn because he knew she would appreciate the simplicity and honesty of it, not some grand public gesture that would have made her uncomfortable. And in all their years together, he had never once made her regret choosing him, choosing this life, choosing to trust again. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan murmured in her ear, and she realized she had been staring off into space. "How lucky I am," she replied softly. "How grateful I am that you found me that day." "I am the lucky one," he countered, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You could have kept walking, could have refused my help, could have moved on to Gunnison and never looked back. But you stayed, and you gave me a chance, and you made my life worth living." Around them, the family continued their meal, oblivious to the quiet moment happening between the patriarch and matriarch. This was the foundation everything else was built on. This love between two people who had found each other when they needed it most. The children and grandchildren were the fruit of that love, but the root was here, in the connection between Beatrice and Ethan that had started with a simple offer of help and grown into something strong enough to weather any storm. After dinner, Marcus pulled out his father's old fiddle, and someone else produced a harmonica, and music filled the house. The younger children danced while the adults clapped and sang along to songs that had been old when Beatrice was young. Samuel partnered his mother for a waltz, spinning her around the room with the same grace his father had shown when teaching her to dance all those years ago, when she was breathless and laughing. Ethan cut in, taking her in his arms with the ease of long practice. They moved together perfectly, anticipating each other's steps, and Beatrice felt like a young bride again, dancing at her wedding reception with her whole life ahead of her. "I love you," Ethan said, so quietly only she could hear. "I love you too," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "Today and always." The party went on late into the evening, but eventually children began to yawn and babies grew fussy, and families started making their way home. Samuel and his wife departed with their children. Marcus and Catherine herded their brood back to their own house. And finally, Beatrice and Ethan were alone again in the house that had been their home for so many years. They moved through the familiar routine of cleaning up, washing dishes, and banking the fire for the night. Ethan checked the locks while Beatrice extinguished the lamps. And then they climbed the stairs together to their bedroom, the same room where they had spent their wedding night, where their children had been conceived, where they had weathered joys and sorrows side by side. As they prepared for bed, Beatrice caught sight of herself in the mirror and paused. She was old now, her hair more gray than brown, lines etched deep around her eyes and mouth, her figure thickened by age and childbearing. But Ethan, coming to stand behind her, looked at her reflection with the same intensity he had shown the first time he saw her. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "You are biased," she replied, but she was smiling. "Absolutely," he agreed, wrapping his arms around her waist. "But that does not make it any less true. I look at you and I see the woman who walked down a mountain road with nothing but courage keeping her going. I see the woman who gave me a chance when she had every reason not to trust any man. I see the mother of my children, the partner in my work, the love of my life. And yes, you are beautiful inside and out today and every day." Beatrice turned in his arms, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best," he confirmed. "And it is not over yet. We have got years ahead of us still, years to watch our grandchildren grow, to see what Samuel does with the ranch, to enjoy the fruits of all our hard work." They went to bed then, curled together in the darkness like they had on 1,000 other nights. Ethan's arm was solid around her waist, his breathing deep and even, and Beatrice felt a peace so profound it was almost transcendent. This was what love was supposed to be, she thought as sleep claimed her. Not the dramatic, consuming passion of romance novels, but this steady, enduring partnership that weathered time and change and emerged stronger for it. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Beatrice watched her children become fully realized adults with families and dreams of their own. She welcomed new grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, each one a precious addition to the growing family tree. The ranch changed and evolved, incorporating new techniques and technologies while maintaining the core values Ethan's parents had established decades ago. Through it all, Beatrice and Ethan remained the heart of the family, the steady center around which everyone else revolved. They were consulted for advice, called upon to settle disputes, and relied upon to provide wisdom gained from decades of living and loving well. And they never took for granted the gift they had been given, the chance to build this life together. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a huge celebration, inviting half the county to join in the festivities. There was a band and dancing, mountains of food and speeches that made both Beatrice and Ethan misty-eyed with emotion. Samuel toasted his parents, talking about the example they had set of what marriage could be. Elena read a poem she had written about love and commitment. Thomas gave a rousing speech about family values that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. But the moment that stayed with Beatrice came later, after most of the guests had left and the family was cleaning up. Ethan found her on the porch, their porch, the one where they had spent countless evenings over the years, and he took her hand. "Dance with me," he said, even though there was no music. "There is no band," she pointed out, but she was already moving into his arms. "We do not need one," he replied, and he began to hum the tune they had danced to at their wedding, slow and sweet and perfect. They swayed together under the stars, moving to music only they could hear, and Beatrice thought her heart might burst with the fullness of her love for this man. 40 years, and he could still make her feel like a blushing bride with a single gesture. 40 years, and she was still discovering new depths to their connection, new reasons to fall in love with him all over again. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" she asked softly. When I told you I had no one. I said you had me now if you wanted me, Ethan replied without hesitation. And I meant it then and I mean it now. You have got me, Beatrice, for as long as I draw breath. You will always have me. And you have me, she whispered back. Today and always you have me. They danced until Ethan's humming faded away, until the only sound was the wind in the pines and the beating of their hearts in tandem. Then they went inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever years remained to them with the same love and commitment that had carried them through the last 4 decades. Time moved on, as it always does. Beatrice's hair turned completely white, and Ethan's joints began to ache on cold mornings. They slowed down, spending more time on the porch and less time working directly on the ranch. Samuel took over the day-to-day operations completely, though he still consulted his father on all major decisions. The house they had filled with children was quiet now, but it filled up on Sundays when the whole family came for dinner, and on holidays when grandchildren and great-grandchildren descended like a loving storm. On a crisp autumn day, very much like the one when they had first met, Beatrice woke to find Ethan already up and dressed, standing at the bedroom window looking out at the mountains. She joined him, slipping her hand into his, and together they watched the sun rise over peaks they had seen turn gold with dawn thousands of times. It never gets old, does it? Ethan said. This view, this place, this life. Never, Beatrice agreed. Every day is a gift. They went downstairs for breakfast, moving carefully because old bones were fragile, and found Samuel already in the kitchen making coffee. He smiled when he saw them, this son who had Ethan's eyes and Beatrice's stubborn determination, and poured 3 cups without asking if they wanted any. I was thinking, Samuel said as they sat down at the table, we should throw a party for your 45th anniversary next year. Really do it up big. 45 years, Beatrice marveled. Where did the time go? Into making a life worth celebrating, Ethan said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. But they never made it to that 45th anniversary. Ethan, strong and healthy right up until the end, passed away peacefully in his sleep one cold January night, with Beatrice curled beside him, and his family gathered close. He simply went to sleep and did not wake up, slipping away so gently it was like he was still there even after the doctor confirmed he was gone. Beatrice held his hand long after it had grown cold, unwilling to let go of the man who had been her partner for more than 4 decades. The family wept around her, but she stayed dry-eyed, in shock or disbelief or maybe just refusing to accept what had happened. It was not until they finally convinced her to let them take him away, to prepare him for burial, that the reality hit her. Ethan was gone. Her cowboy, her husband, her heart, was gone. The funeral was held on a bright winter day that Ethan would have loved, cold and clear with the sun glinting off fresh snow. It seemed like the whole county turned out to pay their respects to a man who had been well loved and deeply respected. The preacher talked about Ethan's faith and his dedication to family, his integrity and his kindness. But it was Samuel's eulogy that broke the dam of Beatrice's grief. My father, Samuel said, his voice breaking, was the best man I ever knew. He taught me how to work hard, how to treat people fairly, how to love deeply and without reservation. But the greatest lesson he taught me was about commitment. He committed to this land, to this family, and most especially to my mother. He found her when she was lost, loved her when she was afraid, and stood by her side through every trial and triumph for 44 years. He showed us all what real love looks like, not just in the grand gestures but in the daily choice to put another person first, to work together, to build something that lasts. And though he is gone from us now, that love remains, in this family he built, in this land he worked, in every life he touched. He is not truly gone as long as we remember him and live by the example he set." Beatrice wept then, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body, and her children gathered around her, supporting her, crying with her. They buried Ethan in the family plot on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Ethan Samuel Rowley, beloved husband, father, and friend. He loved well." The weeks after the funeral were the hardest of Beatrice's life, harder even than losing her own father or running from James. Ethan had been her constant for so long that she did not know how to exist without him. She wandered through the house they had shared, seeing him everywhere, in the chair he preferred by the fire, in the coffee cup he always used, in the worn spot on his side of the bed. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the wind outside. Her children tried to help, taking turns staying with her, but she could see the worry in their eyes. She was not eating, barely sleeping, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. She knew she was scaring them, but she could not seem to pull herself out of the fog of grief that surrounded her. It was Marcus who finally broke through. He came to see her one evening, letting himself in without knocking as family always did, and found her sitting in the dark staring at nothing. "Ethan would hate this," Marcus said bluntly, turning on a lamp. "He would hate seeing you like this, giving up, letting grief destroy what is left of your life." "He is gone," Beatrice said dully. "What is the point of anything without him?" "The point is the family you made together," Marcus replied, sitting down across from her. "The children and grandchildren who need their grandmother. The point is honoring his memory by living well, by choosing joy even in the midst of sorrow. He loved you so much, Beatrice. He would want you to be happy, to find peace, to keep going." "I do not know how," she whispered. "One day at a time," Marcus said gently. "1 hour, 1 minute, if that is all you can manage, but you keep going because that is what survivors do. That is what you did when you were walking down that mountain road all those years ago, and it is what you will do now. Ethan gave you a life worth living. Do not throw that away because he is not here to live it with you." His words were harsh but necessary, and they cut through the haze of grief enough for Beatrice to start seeing clearly again. Marcus was right. Ethan had spent 44 years showing her how to live fully, how to love deeply, how to face challenges with courage and grace. The greatest tribute she could pay to his memory was to keep doing exactly that, so she started small. She got out of bed every morning and got dressed. She made herself eat, even when food tasted like ashes. She accepted visits from her children and grandchildren, letting their love and concern bolster her strength. And slowly, painfully, she began to heal. It was not a linear process. There were days when the grief was so overwhelming she could barely breathe, when she would find something of Ethan's and dissolve into tears all over again. But there were also days when she could smile at a memory without crying, when she could talk about him without her voice breaking, when she could look at their grandchildren and see his legacy living on in their faces and their laughter. Spring came, as it always did, turning the world green and new. Beatrice planted her garden, working the soil with hands that were gnarled with arthritis but still capable. She cooked meals for the family, went to church on Sundays, visited with friends in town. She was not the same woman she had been when Ethan was alive. That carefree joy was gone, replaced by a bittersweet acceptance of life's impermanence. But she was surviving, and some days she was even thriving. One evening, as the anniversary of Ethan's death approached, Beatrice climbed the hill to the family cemetery. She had not been back since the funeral, could not bear to see that simple headstone marking the place where her heart was buried. But now she felt ready, or at least as ready as she would ever be. She stood looking down at the grave, at the fresh flowers someone had left recently, probably a linger. "Hello, my love," she said softly, feeling foolish talking to a piece of granite but needing to say the words anyway. "I am sorry it has taken me so long to come see you. I was not ready before, but I think I am now." The wind whispered through the pines, and a bird sang somewhere nearby, and Beatrice chose to believe it was Ethan's way of answering. "I miss you," she continued, sitting down on the bench Samuel had installed beside the grave. "Every single day I miss you. I miss your laugh and your terrible singing and the way you always knew exactly what to say to make me feel better. I miss waking up next to you and going to sleep in your arms. I miss everything about you, and I do not think that will ever change." She paused, wiping away tears that had started to flow. "But I am trying to live the way you would want me to. I am taking care of myself, spending time with the family, finding moments of joy where I can. It is not easy, and some days I do not want to do it, but I keep going because you taught me how. You taught me to be strong, to face whatever life throws at me with courage and grace." A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace, and Beatrice watched it for a moment before continuing. "Our family is doing well. Samuel has turned the ranch into something even bigger than what you built. Eleanor's children are growing like weeds. Thomas just made partner at his law firm. They all miss you terribly, but they are proud of the legacy you left them. You would be so proud of them too." She fell silent, just sitting with her grief and her memories, letting the peace of this place wash over her. After a while she stood, pressing her hand to the headstone in a final gesture of love. "I will come back more often," she promised. "But I cannot live up here with you. I have got years left, and I need to spend them with the living, carrying your love forward. You will always be in my heart, Ethan Rowley. Always and forever." She walked back down the hill as the sun set, feeling lighter than she had in months. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer defined her entire existence. She could hold both the sorrow of loss and the joy of having known such love. Could carry Ethan's memory with her while still engaging fully with life. Years passed, and Beatrice continued on, becoming the beloved matriarch of a sprawling family that included children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren. She told stories about Ethan to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive for the generations who had never known him. She watched the ranch continue to thrive under Samuel's leadership, saw her other children build successful lives of their own, and took pride in the family tree that had grown from her and Ethan's love. On what would have been their 50th wedding anniversary, the family gathered at the ranch for a memorial celebration. They shared stories about Ethan and Beatrice, about the love that had been the foundation of everything they all were. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears, and through it all, Beatrice felt Ethan's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside her. That night, after everyone had gone home, Beatrice sat alone on the porch one last time. She was 83 years old now, her body worn out from decades of hard work and hard living, but her mind was still sharp, her memories still vivid. She thought about that frightened young woman walking down a mountain road, about the cowboy who had offered her help without asking for anything in return, about the life they had built together from that chance encounter. "We did all right, did we not?" she said softly to the stars, to Ethan wherever he was. "We made something beautiful, something that will last long after we are both gone." The wind picked up, rustling through the pines with a sound that could almost be mistaken for a voice. And in that moment, Beatrice felt a peace so complete it was almost transcendent. She had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with love and family and purpose. She had survived grief and loss and fear to find something worth holding on to. And when her time came, she would go knowing that she had done what she set out to do all those years ago. She had built a home, not just a physical structure but a place of safety and love and belonging. She had raised children who became good, decent people who in turn raised their own children the same way. She had loved and been loved in return, fully and deeply, and without reservation. And though Ethan was gone, their love remained, woven into every board of this house, every acre of this land, every member of this family. Beatrice Rowley passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks later, with her children gathered around her bed just as they had been for Ethan. She went with a smile on her face, and those who knew her best liked to think she had seen her cowboy waiting for her on the other side, ready to take her hand and lead her home. They buried her next to Ethan on that hillside overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "Beatrice Margaret Rowley, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she loved and was loved in return." And if you visit that cemetery today, you will find fresh flowers on both graves, placed there by descendants who still tell the story of the frightened woman on a mountain road and the cowboy who told her she had him now if she wanted him. It is a story about love, yes, but also about courage and choice and the power of one person to change another's life completely. It is about how family is not always blood, but sometimes the people who choose to stand by you when you have nowhere else to turn. It is about building something that lasts, not through grand gestures but through daily choices to show up, to work hard, to love deeply. And it is a story with a happy ending, because they found each other when they needed it most, built a life that brought joy to countless people, and loved each other faithfully until death and beyond. In the end, what more could anyone ask for than that?